This is the battle of the affordable sedans, and representing America is the Ford Aspire, while the Germans are represented by the VW Ameo. So, which one is a better bet and which one should you invest your money in? Let's find out on the show today.
Well, in terms of overall perceived quality, it is the VW Ameo which is definitely ahead of the Aspire, and by a huge margin, because everything really does feel very well bolted together. All the switchgear is very tactile to operate, and in terms of features, it is really neck and neck between the Aspire as well as the Ameo. Now remember, the Aspire has an option of 6 airbags, which is something unique to this segment, but the Ameo has cruise control, which is something which is very unique as well, because no other car in this segment offers that. So both these cars really neck and neck. One department where this car is slightly behind than the Aspire is in overall practicality. Now, even though you do get a big elbow box over here where you can keep your wallet as well as cell phone, the door bins can only house one big bottle in terms of space. The Aspire, on the other end, has place for 3 bottles of this size. So the Aspire might be down in terms of overall quality, but it is ahead in terms of practicality. Well, so here I'm inside the cabin of the Ford Aspire, and the perceived quality of this car is slightly behind that of the VW Ameo. Well, one area where the Aspire is also slightly behind the Ameo is in the ease of operation. This plethora of buttons over here on the center console can really put you off, because it is very, very difficult to operate. It's not as intuitive as the one on the Ameo, and that's something that maybe Ford should improve in the next version of this car. Well, where the Aspire truly does impress is in overall comfort, because these seats offer you excellent support. Support for the lower back is very good, the cushioning is very good, and the seat scob is also very long, which means that even the tallest of tall passengers have enough support for the under thighs. And along with that, it's a very practical cabin. You get this huge tray over here where you can keep your cell phone. You also get a tray right over here below the handbrake, and you also get these big bottle holders right next to the handbrake. And the door bins can hold not 1, not 2, but 3 bottles on each side. And what all that means is that the Aspire's cabin can actually hold 9 bottles together, and that really goes to show you the amount of attention to detail that Ford have paid inside the Aspire's cabin. Well, when it comes to rear seat space, it really is the Aspire which has the edge and the clear edge over the Ameo. And as you can see, knee room over here is really limited, and even though headroom is more or less okay, if you are someone who is over 6 feet tall, you will really struggle for comfort in the backseat of the Ameo, and in that sense the Aspire remains the better option when it comes to rear seat space. And of course, if you are someone who enjoys to be chauffeur driven, then it is the Aspire which offers you the better backseat experience than the Ameo. Well, so I'm in the backseat of the Ford Aspire, and this car truly does feel as if it is from a segment high when you compare it with the Ameo, and that's because you get loads of knee room over here. Headroom is more than adequate. In fact, it is very good. And I have adjusted the front seat as always for my height, and my height for reference is 5'10". I also have place below the front seats where I can stretch my feet. So this car really does feel a sub-segment higher when you compare to the Ameo, which really does have a very cramped interior. Well, what makes the back seat of the Aspire better than the ones on the Ameo is the fact that the backrest angle is spot on, the cushioning is excellent as well, and even support for the under thighs is very good for the tallest of tall passengers. Well, what also makes this car a true 3-seater at the back is the fact that there's a very slight hump in the floor panel. Unlike the Ameo, which has a very prominent hump, you can genuinely have 3 occupants over here, and they won't be fighting for knee room or leg room, because the footwells are pretty big to accommodate the person who's sitting here and his feet. And what's more, this car also gets a center armrest over here, which you can pull out and sit here like the boss. Well, when compared to the Aspire, the Ameo's boot is slightly smaller. Well, now the reason I've kept this bottle in the boot over here is to show you that this car is about 29 liters lower in its capacity than the Ameo. But the advantage it has is that the opening is pretty wide, the aperture over here is pretty wide, and it's also a pretty well-shaped boot. It's a very square boot in its shape, which means that you can heave in those big bags as well as those big boxes without any issues at all. The other good point is that suspension intrusion is really very minimal, so you can really utilize every centimeter inside the Ameo's boot very well. Well, so the Aspire's boot is bigger than the Ameo's. This one is 359 liters in space, and it's a pretty deep boot. Well, there is a bit of a loading lip, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue because it's a very small one, because at the end of the day, this car is much bigger in terms of boot capacity over the VW Ameo. Well, so the Aspire wins the battle of the boot as well as the battle of the back seat. So here I'm driving the VW Ameo, and this car, remember, comes with a 1.2 litre petrol engine. Now it's the same engine which is also shared with the Polo, and this engine makes about 74 bhp of power. Now these power figures are the lowest in this segment, but that's not all. The other issue with the car is that it's not as refined as some of its main rivals. So if you rev the engine too much, the engine can become a little buzzy and the cabin can be a little loud inside. On the plus side though, the engine feels pretty responsive from low RPMs, which makes it a decent car for city travel. And the clutch is pretty light and also has a very springy action to it, and the gearbox also is pretty accurate and pretty slick to use, which means that if you are someone who drives himself in the city, then you shouldn't have too much of an issue with the light controls of this car. Well, the Ameo cannot hold a candle to the Aspire when it comes to sheer performance. It's not as refined as the Aspire's unit, and it's not even as powerful as the Aspire's unit, so you really have to rev it hard to get it going. And that's not a pleasant thing, because the Ameo can get a little boomy and a little noisy inside the cabin when you mount up the revs. So in that sense, it is clearly the Ford Aspire which has the advantage over the VW Ameo in terms of performance as well as agility. Well, as soon as you step inside the Aspire, you will realize that the engine on this car is a lot more refined than the Ameo's engine, and that is something which is going to be natural, because this car, remember, is a 4-cylinder engine, unlike the Ameo, which is only a 3-cylinder unit, so it cannot have the same amount of refinement that the Ford has. Where the Aspire also has the clear advantage over the Ameo is in overall responsiveness. The engine on the Aspire feels a lot more responsive to throttle inputs, and even when you rev it hard, the Aspire's engine has a very nice and sporty tone at the exhaust. And unlike the Ameo, which tends to become very loud when you rev it hard, the Aspire tends to have a very sporty note at the exhaust. Well, both these cars offer you similar levels of high-speed stability, but when you are driving it in the city, it is the Aspire which has the edge in terms of overall ride comfort. Well, the Ameo, in comparison to the Aspire, has a very harsh edge to its ride, while the Aspire really does tend to round off those harsh edges. Well, if you call yourself a keen driver, then you should definitely choose the Aspire over not only the Ameo but also all the other cars in this category. And why is that? Well, because the Aspire steering wheel has very good communication. It's a very crisp steering wheel, and along with this very dynamic and very agile chassis, this car really does manage to put a smile on your face every time you take it out for a drive. And if you are someone who enjoys taking his car up the hills on a very regular basis and enjoys pushing his car into corners, then you will definitely enjoy the Aspire, because it has a very well balanced chassis, and it also has a very crisp steering wheel. Well, in terms of overall ride comfort at slow city speeds, as I just mentioned, it is the Aspire which has a slight advantage over the Ameo. In terms of highway stability, it is neck and neck again between both these cars. So these cars are very close in terms of overall ride comfort at higher highway speeds. Well, another area where this car has the advantage over the Ameo is in the fact that the cabin on this car feels a lot more bigger and a lot more brighter than the one on the Ameo, and that's because you get these beige seats, and that adds to the feeling of roominess as well as airiness inside the cabin.
Overall, this was one of the more easy comparisons to judge, and the Ford Aspire wins this easily. And why is that? Well, it comes with a roomy and well-built cabin, lots of space in the back, and a bigger boot too. And in terms of features, it is very closely matched with the VW Ameo. But the deal maker for the Aspire is the fact that the engine is a lot more responsive, a lot more refined, and feels a lot more flexible as well. So it is the American car which wins the battle of the midsiders today.